Thank you for coming out tonight, and welcome to the American Founding Initiative's annual President's Day talk. Tonight we are not having a talk, and it doesn't really concern the presidents, but it is a day. We are structuring a sort of debate on what I take to be one of the central issues of our time. It is a philosophic question. Where do we look to for permanence in human life or stability from which to build things and expect things? We sometimes look for moral absolutes. We sometimes gaze upon God and His Word. Could the conscience be such a permanent thing? We sometimes recognize the body as a site of permanence. In any event, the philosophical question of where we look to for permanence has obvious practical implications in many walks of life. Those who would defend limited government or constitutional order, for instance, want to think that there are permanent problems of human nature to which government orders must respond. Those who would defend the family want to think that the family either responds to permanent needs or fulfills permanent duties, or perhaps other such permanent things. And it is this last thing that we will discuss tonight. The title of tonight's event is Darwinism, Feminism, and the Family. It concerns whether evolutionary science can provide a stable foundation for family life. To help us think through this problem, we have two scholars and friends of mine here tonight, and we have organized their remarks in the form of a panel discussion or debate. First, we will hear from Ken Blanchard, a professor of political science at Northern State University in Aberdeen, South Dakota. Dr. Blanchard is the editor of a fine volume entitled Darwinian Conservatism, and he is a pioneer of sorts in the field of sociobiology. By pioneer, I mean he has a body himself, and he is concerned with society. Dr. Blanchard is among those who lead the field of biopolitics, and he knows a lot of interesting and also not so interesting facts about animals and people. Second, we will hear from Dr. Carson Holloway from the University of Nebraska, Omaha. You all may know Dr. Holloway as the author of All Shook Up, Music, Passion, and Politics, a book about rock and roll, and what philosophers say about the effects of music on the soul. He also wrote a book, The Right Darwin? Evolution, Religion, and the Future of Democracy. He is a believer in the Trinity, or at least he always puts three things after the colon in his book titles. Our format tonight is as follows. Dr. Blanchard will speak for about 20 minutes to explain what evolution teaches about the family and other things. Dr. Holloway then has 20 minutes to provide remarks about the promise and limits of evolutionary theories. Then Dr. Blanchard has 10 minutes to respond, and he'll ask questions of Dr. Holloway, and Dr. Holloway will do the same. Then we will open up to questions from the audience. Neither Dr. Blanchard nor Dr. Holloway are overly pretentious, I think, and you should feel free to let her rip in the questions. It is my experience that these gentlemen are actually more than eager to chat about these matters and other matters. And we are eager, no doubt, to hear from them, so let us begin with Dr. Ken Blanchard.
Thanks. Can everybody hear me okay? All right, good. Hi, I'm Ken Blanchard. I'm a Darwinist. Suddenly this feels like a 12-step program. But we'll see if we can keep from weaning you off it. My field, we really don't have a name for it. We'd like to call it biopolitics, but that was taken up by a bunch of followers of Michel Foucault, and so it's a little hard to know what to call it, but biopolitics or the biosocial sciences are probably pretty good titles for it. My specific field, the one thing that I'm really sort of a pioneer in, is the consilience or jumping together of Darwinian biological theory, evolutionary theory, and political philosophy. In particular, the idea of natural justice or natural law and human biology. I was taught by Harry Jaffa at Claremont, the Claremont Graduate School, who was a pioneer in Lincoln and the Declaration of Independence. And we talked about natural right all the time. The trouble is, nobody there, as far as I can tell, knows where babies come from. If you're going to talk about natural justice, you need to know something about nature, and so eventually that's kind of what I did. When we talk about natural justice, we're talking about the idea that just as a doctor can tell you how to take care of your body because he understands the nature of the human body, if we know something about human nature in general, we know something about right and wrong. That's something Aristotle believed, something Plato believed, something Abraham Lincoln believed. And it's something I think that modern evolutionary theory supports. And trying to bring all those things together is what I write about and discuss. I would mention there's recently a handbook of political science and biology that's just come out, and chapter 13 on political ethics. You should read chapter 13. The author is very wise. But my thesis today is very simply that Darwinian evolutionary theory, as it's being interpreted in the biosocial sciences, supports the rights of women in particular, the rights of human beings in general, and it supports the family as an essential institution in human history. And that's not a bad bag, and it's often been argued quite the opposite. There's for a long time this idea that Darwinism is reductionism, that reduces everything to selfish motives, and those things simply aren't true of Darwinian theory any longer. Now, as a caveat, I want to make it clear what I think Darwinian biosocial science can and cannot do when it comes to natural ethics. Let's take a simple example. There's no human culture of any significant size in which males, men, invest as much time and resources in raising their children as women do. No such culture on the planet that I know of, and I've looked. And there are reasons for this, rooted in evolutionary history. You can use evolutionary theory to explain why women invest more in children than men do. The facts that I've mentioned just now have no moral implications. The fact that something is due to evolved inclinations tells you nothing about whether it's right or wrong. The good stuff and the bad stuff that human beings do, all of them have some roots in human nature, or almost all of them. Now, take a second example. Among human beings, males invest a lot more in raising their offspring than almost any other mammal, and certainly than most primates do. Owl monkeys are a possible exception, but that's irritating, so we'll forget about them. Men are inclined to support their mates and their offspring, and they're inclined to do so by biologically original motives. They have been shaped by natural selection to invest more in their offspring than most other creatures. Third fact, they're also sometimes tempted to cheat, to promise an investment but not deliver it. That's not unknown among other animals. Read sometime about the pied flycatcher bird, and you will see a story that is an avian soap opera. But it's clearly true among us. Finally, a fourth fact, in general, both men, women, and finally their offspring benefit from that increased male parental investment. This is across the species, almost universal. And these facts do have moral implications. Because basically, here's a proposition. The good is the choice worthy. When we say something's good, what we mean is there is something about it which gives us a reason under certain contexts to choose it over not choosing or over some alternative. That's what we mean when we say something's good. Something's morally good when it's genuinely choice-worthy, but we're tempted to choose something that isn't. When there's a difference between what looks good and what really is good, then we're talking about a moral dimension. And human beings are moral animals. We are capable of perceiving that. Bacteria, probably not so much, but we can. What is good for human beings, individually and collectively, is rooted in our biology. It's rooted in our evolved dispositions. What's good for me? Food, shelter, warmth, single malt scotch, Scarlett Johansson. We could go on. These are the things, I mean, why do they bring these things to me in movies? There's a reason why they bring her. We can talk about movie stars if we want. But those are the things which I have evolved dispositions to like. What's good for us? Because that's another question. That's a different question. It's not the same for us as human beings, for us as a group here in this room, here in this town, here in this country, on planet Earth. What's good for us as social animals? Because human beings are social animals. What's good for us as political animals? Because we're political animals. Aristotle recognized that 3 centuries before Christ. What's good for us as familial animals? Because we clearly are that as well. We are, the vast majority of us, born with familial implications. There's been a tremendous amount of work done on all these questions very recently. I mean, the theory and the evidence has advanced dramatically over the last 10, 15 years. And I mentioned some of the scholars that have pioneered this work. To start with, social animals. Human beings are extraordinarily cooperative. If there's anything that has explained why we've come to dominate the planet more than any other primate, more than almost any other mammal, forget about rats for a minute. It's that ability of human beings to coordinate their actions, to form cooperative units, to benefit each other. Michael Tomasello, in particular, has done some wonderful work on this, and he's got a basically 2-stage theory of how human beings become social and cooperative animals. The first stage is what we call obligate collective foraging. Human beings begin to forage together, and they stick together. Probably their original reason for sticking together is to avoid predators, or at least scare them off. They didn't in the beginning. We did not cooperate. We did not coordinate. However, we sometimes did all chase the rabbit at the same time, and that is a better chance of catching the rabbit, right? That's called mutualism in Darwinian theory of cooperation. Eventually, we got so good at hunting together that we couldn't do without each other. Then it becomes, as we say, obligate. That leads to a sense of group-mindedness. We start to think as a unit. We start to think in terms of us versus other animals, versus mysterious beings, versus other groups of human beings. How do we become political animals? Christopher Boehm probably is the best original source on this, the Moral Origins, a hierarchy of force. There's a problem with being social primates. And the problem with being a social primate is primates are antisocial. We don't get along with each other. When we get together, I mean, we're not naturally, at least not originally, well designed to get along with each other. We bump into each other. We start to compete over resources. Cooperation leads to contiguity. If you're going to cooperate, you've got to be around each other, and contiguity leads to conflict. And there are 2 kinds of conflict which I think lead to a high level of problems for social primates. One is agonistic conflict between males competing with each other. More than anything else, competing over access to mates. And the other is infanticide, males killing unrelated offspring. Males versus males is a problem for the male side of the equation. Males versus infants is a problem for the female side of the equation. And you got to have solutions. And when you look at other apes and similar primates, what you see is, in case by case, those animals have evolved towards solutions to this problem. Gorillas, it's polygyny. One silverback, and there's no other males around except his sons. No conflict between males. And no conflict between him and the offspring, because they're all his offspring. Red-tailed monkeys, everybody has sex with everybody. Nobody knows who. Father's Day is very confusing. And consequently, there's no conflict between the males and each other, except other kinds of conflict. Promiscuous males tend to have extremely large testicles. I gave a talk about that once in church, and I mentioned the testes to body mass ratio, and the pastor who was listening said, I believe that's the first time that's ever been said here. Probably is. Chimpanzees do it with promiscuity, but in a hierarchy. Alpha male goes first when a female goes into estrus. And when she goes into estrus, her butt swells up and turns pink. You can see it from space. You can smell it for miles. And that's another system. Bonobos, very similar to chimpanzees, they have solved this problem with female coalitions. Female coalitions rove around, and if one male starts to beat up another, her mother shows up with 15 other females. Actually, it's about 3. And they beat the crap out of them. After a while, you stop fighting. But what about the anthropoi? What Boehm and other scholars have figured out, and this is based on all kinds of evidence, extraordinarily wide range of evidence, from what we know about pre-modern human beings to actual hunter-gatherer societies, is human beings solved it by forming what were essentially small egalitarian societies. And they did so by establishing an egalitarian ethos, an ethical set of principles. You don't push people around, and you don't lay down when everybody else is going hunting. You suppress bullies. And how do you suppress bullies? There's a very recent piece of work out by Richard Wrangham, which argues that one reason we human beings became so cooperative and social is we killed off the bullies. And that had an evolutionary, a selection pressure on our society over time. I suspect that's probably true. But certainly, what you see universally in hunter-gatherer societies is an egalitarian ethos. You don't bully other people. And if somebody turns into a bully, the rest of the group sanctions them in one way or another. They ignore them, they insult them, they make fun of them, they kick them out of the group. Sometimes they kill them. That's how that works. And that's basically how we set off on the course down toward being political animals. And what it shows us is this sort of early modern view of human beings that, by nature, we all have basic rights. It's really, in an odd way, in a surprising way, very consonant with our evolutionary history. Probably, and more work needs to be done on this, but probably in most of those egalitarian societies, the situation of women was much better than it would be for the next 12,000 years under agriculture and highly stratified societies. Well, some women, that's a little complicated, I don't have time to get into it. But clearly, everybody can be bullied, and everybody can be protected against bullies. And that probably went on for long enough. We're talking about a period somewhere between 200,000 to the last 50,000 years. This kind of egalitarian ethos enforced by the group is one of the reasons why we became moral animals. It's how we developed a sense of right and wrong. We started to internalize these principles. And even today, you go to a hunter-gatherer band and you watch somebody who's the best hunter in that band and he comes back with an enormous animal. He doesn't go home and eat it all by himself. He shares it with the rest of the group. And he doesn't brag about his kill. Somebody walks up and says, "That's a pretty big kill." I got lucky. He didn't get lucky. He was good. But if he brags, then it looks like he's getting too big for his britches. Then the rest of the group starts to look at him a little funny. And that can be fatal. When that goes on long enough, it has an effect. We're not the only animals capable of moral consciousness. There's a marvelous film out there that Frans de Waal made of a capuchin monkey. They taught them to use money. The capuchin monkeys could get a piece of lettuce for 1 stone, and they could get grapes, which is a much more highly valuable food, for 2 stones. And one day, they've been doing this exchange, and the monkeys are getting really used to it. Yeah, here's my stone, I get lettuce. Okay, here's my 2 stones, I get grapes. They switch the rules. The first monkey has 1 stone, and he gets grapes. The second monkey hands over 2 stones, and they give him lettuce. He looks at the lettuce. He looks at the experiment. He looks at the lettuce. He looks at the experiment. And then he throws it at him. He bounces off the guy's head and into the air. That suggests moral consciousness. We're not the only creatures that have, but clearly it's more highly developed in us than in any other creature. Finally, we are familial animals. Talked about the solution to agonistic violence between males, conflict between males. What about the problem of infanticide? The This problem is solved in different ways. Polygynous society, social animals like gorillas or elk don't have the problem, since the male has